worship pastor here at Mount Vernon, and I'm so pumped to be leading worship with this awesome team this morning. Some of our Sunday worship leaders, some of our Radiate Youth worship leaders, so thankful for them, so thankful for Michael Stamey from ABF Church, and we're just going to have a great time worshiping the Lord for a few minutes. Are you ready to do that? Come on now, are you ready to do that? All right, come on, let's stand and let's worship. Let's worship the Lord. Here we go. Absolutely nothing our God can't do. Nothing impossible. Just one word, you calm the storm that surrounds me. Come on, sing it out. Just one word, the darkness has to retreat. Oh, just one touch, I feel the presence of heaven. Just one touch, my eyes are open to see. My heart can't help but believe. Come on. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. We believe that. Just one word, you heal what's broken inside me. Yes, you do. Just one word, and you revive every dream. Just one touch, I feel the power of heaven. Just one touch, my eyes are open to see. My heart can't help but believe. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's nothing. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a prison wall He can't break through. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. I will believe. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise and let all agree. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Come on. And I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power. You sing it. Jesus. Let faith arise and let all agree. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Oh, I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise and let all agree. There's no power like His power. There's nothing that our God can't do. And there's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a prison wall He can't break through. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do.
weapon that silences the enemy. Let praise be a weapon that conquers all anxiety. Let it rise. Let praise arise. We sing your name in the dark and it changes everything. We sing with all we are and we claim your victory. Let it rise. Let praise arise. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. For fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God who breakthroughs on our side. Forever lift him high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Let faith be a song that overcomes the rages. Let faith be the song that calms the storm inside of me. Let it rise. Let faith arise. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. For fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side. Forever lift him high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. For fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side.
better than you. And Lord, there's nothing is better than you. And oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing is better than you. You turn morning, and you turn morning to dancing. And you give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. And you're the only one who can. Oh, you turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. Oh, you turn seas into highways. But you're the only one who can. You're the only one who. You're the only one who Thank you so much. You guys can go ahead and be seated. I want to just formally welcome you to Mount Vernon Baptist Church. Thank you so much for choosing the Respond Conference this Saturday to come out here and to help equip families to be the main discipling factor in their students' life. We want you to know that even though this is hosted at Mount Vernon, this is a combined effort, the Student Ministries Coalition. Make sure you follow us on Instagram. This is our third conference. We try to do about 2 a year. So do that and stay up to date with what's going on. And we'd love to see you next time, whatever the Lord leads us to do. It is my job this morning to kind of give you some basic instructions, right? Everybody's favorite part of a conference. So, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mitchell Pace, all right? The most important thing is where in the world in the maze of this church are the bathrooms. So let me help you with that. If you go out these double doors and hang a right, there are some potties over there. If you go through these double doors and kind of follow the flow of the building, there are some potties over there. We ask that you use the potties. That's what they're there for. Please don't go in the bushes or anything like that. Praise God, we are sold out. That is an answer to prayer. Absolutely. But with that, praise God, means that we are going to have absolutely full breakout rooms. Now, you're going to hear in a minute or a little while about those breakouts. Just know that if you go to a room and it is full, that's not a bad thing. That is a great thing. It just means that you didn't get there soon enough, and you might need to take a U-turn and find a different breakout session, okay? So one of those sessions is happening in here. If by chance you get to a session and it is full and you don't feel comfortable standing in the back or it's too crowded for you, there'll be plenty of room in here. So there's plenty of seats. It just may not be the one that you originally chose for that hour. But the good thing is we have 2 hours, and all of them will go both hours. So make sure you pay attention to that and get there in a timely fashion so you can get a good seat. That would be great. Lunch. Everything happens on this level except for lunch. Lunch is downstairs where you registered. You saw all those tables. We have Daniel Boone Inn, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, some kind of vegetable, but I don't really care what the vegetable is because that's not important. I think there's biscuits that are on that plate, and they are already pre-made and ready for you. So you just go down there, grab them nice and hot. We're so thankful for Daniel Boone Inn for helping us out with that. And I hope you are blessed by Southern cooking. Amen. And also we have seating indoors, but if you enjoy nature and the lovely cool weather, we got some picnic tables out for you. And if you feel like a hike, you can go out towards the ball fields and eat at the pavilion. It's a little bit of a hike, but you may like that. I don't know. Okay. And I also want you to know that afterwards, Blake worked hard and he got us what is it? I can't remember the name of it. Rolled Sweets Food Truck is going to be outdoors after the conference for anybody that likes to eat ice cream in cool weather, which I happen to be one of those people. And we're so happy because where's Aaron Israel? Aaron Israel has offered to buy everyone ice cream after the conference, okay?
Not really. He broke his ankle. He can't pay for anything these days. But hey, look, it's not part of the conference, but you might want to go out there and enjoy some ice cream with the family. We encourage you to go out there. I have one last request before I introduce our main session speaker, and that is we still have some people filing in. I know what it's like to be I'm a pretty big guy, okay? I know what it's like to be in a pew. You kind of get in there and you do your little wiggle and you kind of stretch out and get some room. Hey, if you start seeing people come in, kind of scooch in and give some people that opportunity. We promise the sanctuary holds what we told you, but it does mean that you have to love the people next to you, okay? You're going to spend eternity in heaven with them. You might as well spend a couple hours and here really, really close with them. So with that said, guys, it's my honor. I got to pick up Sean yesterday at the airport and hang out with him. We had some Subway in the car. That was kind of a mess, but that's a whole different story. But we're just so thankful that Sean said yes to coming out here. If you're not familiar with Sean, you can read the bio there in your breakout booklet. But we're thankful to have someone who loves the Lord, who loves truth, and loves helping equip people to be able to defend their faith. So Sean, if you don't mind, come on up here. We appreciate you being here. Do you know the
I don't need that for this one. You can take it. Good morning. What a joy to be here with you during such a beautiful season. My goodness. First when I got invited, I was like, I don't know if anyone's going to show up. This is in the South on football season on a Saturday, college football. But I understand you guys already played Wednesday and got beat. I'm just kidding. Calm down. I see where the energy is in this room. It's going to be a good day. Well, we are going to have some fun, and we're going to make it worth your time. And we're going to start by doing something a little bit different than you're probably used to. In fact, maybe didn't even expect. But I brought something to me I affectionately call my atheist glasses. When these glasses go on, my worldview is going to shift from a Bible professor in apologetics and apologist to atheist. I'll spend about 4 or 5 minutes telling the story of my atheist character, which is actually the story of a friend of mine, adapted a little bit. And then we'll open it up. Mitch and Blake will walk around and even go up to the cheap seats up top with microphones and take whatever questions you'd like to ask an atheist. And I will do my best to respond as an atheist might. And then take the glasses off and we will debrief what we learned from this experience. Are you all ready for this? Yeah, not as ready as you were for football, but I get it. I know exactly where I'm at. Okay, so a couple things keep in mind, though. Jason mentioned if someone comes in late, scooch over so they can fit. If that person comes in late, scoot over and also tell them that I am only role-playing. Hopefully this is for obvious reasons, but I teach at a university called Biola University, great Christian school in Southern California. We have one fan in the house. And when I went to Biola as an undergrad in the mid to late 90s, we would have chapel in our gym. And you can imagine, 2,000-3,000 students would pack in the gym. And we had this speaker who was a missionary to Muslims. So he started off by talking about how he was a missionary to Muslims, and what he was going to do was this kind of evangelistic message as if he were a Muslim to the Biola student body, and then take questions, and he would answer as a Muslim might. And I remember thinking, this is so interesting. I've never heard an Islamic evangelistic message. Well, he starts, kind of puts on this Arabic garb, it starts, and a student comes in the back late, not knowing what was going on. He shouts from the top of his lungs in front of the entire student body, "This is not the house of Allah. This is the house of the one true living God." Awkward silence. Every single time I saw him the next couple years was like, yep, there goes that guy. So don't be that guy. Don't be that girl. If someone comes late, go, psst, he's just role-playing. Second, I'm not saying all atheists believe as I do in character. Of course, there's a range of views of people that would describe themselves as atheists. There's existentialists, nihilists, postmodernists, secular humanists. I debated a guy a couple years ago, called himself the friendly atheist, pretty nice guy. And then I've interacted with some atheists where, let's just say, I might use a different adjective, and everywhere else in between. So I'm not saying all atheists believe this. It's just an atheist character, and we'll see how it goes, all right? Glasses go on. Going to tell you my character a few minutes, then open it up for questions, and we're going to have a conversation. Now are you ready? Yeah. All right, here we go. Good morning, church. Thanks for having me as an atheist to share in your congregation. This is an unusual invitation for me. As an atheist, you can imagine that I typically don't get invited to speak in a church. But I want you to know that it's an honor to be here. I was asked to explain why I'm an atheist and just open up for some questions. Thought you might find it interesting that I actually grew up in a Christian home, went to church. I went on mission trips. I would pray, read my Bible, went to Awana, could memorize verses. In fact, I would get $10 allowance a week, and I'd put $1 each week, you know, as they pass by for the church, because I was like, hey, this is just what good Christians are supposed to do for my tithe. I really believed it. But when I was in high school, a sophomore, about 15, 16 years old, I had this friend, and we'd debate things like, we would debate sports. We debate Marvel versus DC, and by the way, there is no debate. And we debate things like religion. And one day she asked me some questions I hadn't really thought about before. My first thought was, well, the Bible says. My second thought was, well, my pastor told me. My third thought was like, well, my parents taught me. And my fourth thought is what I call a game changer. My fourth thought was, I really don't know the answer to that. I'm going to go read and think and watch videos. And to make a long story short, when I began to read people that disagreed with the views I had been raised in, I started to realize there's no good scientific evidence that God exists. In fact, science is against faith. There's no reason to think the Bible's true. It's full of far too many errors and contradictions and, frankly, immoral teaching to come from a holy God. And last, I'm not even sure Jesus existed. The evidence is thin and contradictory and biased. And over time, I became an atheist. It wasn't easy. You could imagine if your kids or if you left your faith, what that would be like. It wasn't easy for me, but over time, it was much more liberating to just follow truth wherever it leads. So I guess I look at it like this, then I'll open up and see what questions you might have. How many of you have studied the ancient Greco-Roman gods, the stories from history in English class? How many of you recognize some of these stories, the Greco-Roman gods like Zeus and Poseidon? Do you know these stories? Okay, all right, good. Looks like almost all of you do. Well, when the ancient Greeks couldn't explain something like earthquakes, what did they say was the cause? The gods are angry, right? Or they couldn't explain something like, say, rain. What would they say? The gods or goddesses are sad, right? Well, notice their thinking. They didn't have a natural explanation like plate tectonics for why the ground moved. So they punted, so to speak, to the gods to explain it. This is called God of the gaps. But the problem is, as science advances, the room for God gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, if you want to believe in God because it gives you comfort or community, that's fine with me. But I say time out when people say this is true and then tell the rest of us we're going to hell for not believing it and want to force their morals on society. I think you better have some good evidence if you're going to make that kind of claim. Now, I can keep talking, but I think we'll have a much more interesting conversation if we just open up. What would you like to ask an atheist? A question about what I believe? What are you curious about? We've got Mitch and Blake. They will roam around and find you. Just state your question kind of as quickly as you can so we can get as many questions as possible. Sometimes there's an awkwardness to have the first question, so let's skip the first and go straight to the second question. Raise them and they'll find you. I see one up here. I saw one over there. Put them up high, and they'll come find you back and forth.
My side first. I win.
All right, I got my glasses on too. What are the 3 most important questions you ask of life?
3 most important questions? You know what? I'm just going to sum it up with one question. What is true? What is true? I think it's important to ask the question, is there a God? Is there life after death? Is there a meaning to life? If so, what is it? Those are the big questions that I think I would assume, correct me if I'm wrong, you and I would agree on are the big questions. I think we'd agree that we can find answers to them. We just probably differ over to what those answers are. Does that help? And it's okay, good. I want to give you a chance to follow up if it's helpful. The question over here, and then you find another one. Put your hands up. I see one up top there. Yes.
How do you define a fool, and are you one?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know anybody, regardless of their belief system, who thinks they're the fool, right? I mean, have you ever met anyone who's like, yeah, I'm a fool? Like, honestly, I don't know anybody who thinks they are. Now, are there people who are fools? Sure. The question is, am I a fool? Or are you a fool? Or if Muslims are right, we're both fools. Right? I think the fool would be somebody who just believes something that's false in probably a silly manner. Like, well, that's a foolish thing to believe. It's not grounded in evidence. It's not backed up. You haven't looked at all the data, and you're believing something that's silly. So frankly, for me, a fool is somebody who thinks you can live 3 days in a fish. For me, a fool is somebody who thinks snakes actually talk. For me, a fool is someone who thinks a donkey actually talked, or the earth is 6,000 years old, that violates all of modern science. That's what I would define as a fool. So whether that's you or me, I'll let you fill in the blank.
I noticed you didn't say a fool is one who doesn't believe in God.
Of course I didn't say that. Good question, fair, I don't mind. If you ask a tough question, I'll give you my honest thoughts. Go.
Why would you say we're here? Why would you say we're alive?
By the way, hold on. The fool in the Bible is not someone who doesn't believe in God. That's not what the Bible means by it in Psalms 14, just for the record. So if that's what you're referring to, you're mistaking your own scriptures. Go ahead.
Why would you say we're here or why we're alive?
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by why. Like, is there a grand purpose and a designer who placed us here? I would say no, because I don't believe in God. But is there an explanation for why we're here? And I'd say yes. I think we can point to certain processes in science. There's certain stellar evolution that explains our planet, how we happen to be in a habitable zone, how there's life, given the number of planets and laws of gravity. It's not surprising. Also, the number of planets in our solar system and in our galaxy and beyond. Why we're here, I would point to processes in evolution I think are grounded pretty scientifically in an undebatable fashion. So I don't think there's a God that explains why we're here, but I think there's a sufficient scientific explanation why we're here. I could go into more depth if you wanted me to, but that would be my broad answer. Does that make sense? Do you want to follow up?
Well, why would you say instead of just stopping and stop evolving into just mindless beasts, why are we of higher intelligence than, say, a cow or an elephant or something like that?
Well, I don't remember saying we've stopped evolving. In fact, I'm pretty certain I didn't say that. It's not like humans are the height and pinnacle of all knowledge. Now, women might be, men certainly are not. That's a separate issue, just for the record. But I never said that. But you got to also realize, if you understand the process of evolution, it doesn't say that all species that exist are endlessly moving forward positively. It doesn't say that all would necessarily do that. I think you mentioned cows. If you have certain beings or animals, species, and they evolve and can fit within an environment, and that environment doesn't radically change, you might hit a period of stasis for an extended period of time. So the fact that, so again, I didn't say that all species have stopped evolving, but that at least some would seem to, for an extended period of time, fits in exactly what evolutionary theorists would posit. Hey, by the way, since this came up, how many of you don't believe in evolution? Let me see your hands. How many of you don't believe in evolution? Okay, all right, put your hands down. I'm going to call on you. How many of you can define what biological evolution actually is? Let me see your hands. Put them up. I'm going to call on you. You can define what it is. Give me a definition. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 8 or 10 of you. Okay, put your hands down. So none of you believe in this, and maybe 5% of you can define it. Does that strike you as at least mildly problematic? I mean, honestly. Like, if you asked me if I believe in the Bible, I was like, no, and you said, have you read it? I was like, I don't have to read it. I know it's false. What would you say? What would you say? At least read it and understand it before you reject it, and I'd say that is fair. So if you're going to reject something that's the cornerstone not only of biology, but of all the sciences, shouldn't you at least understand it and then consider the evidence for it? That was me when I was a Christian. I was told, don't believe this, and I just didn't. But then I started to ask questions and read the evidence, and it was like taking the red pill. Kids, if you don't understand that, ask your parents about the greatest film of all time. All right.
Hey, thank you very much for taking the question. Talk a little bit on what basis do you derive your morality, what's right and wrong, how we should live? Is it something within you? Is it something without? How do you... on what basis do you derive your morality?
That's a great question. I can tell you where I will after I tell you where I don't. I certainly don't go to the Bible like I used to. So if you look in the Bible, it's like there seems to be an approval for slavery, misogyny towards women, genocide. So I used to give those things a pass when I was younger. Well, God has his reasons, and there's different kind of slavery, and genocide's okay in this context. Then I got older, I'm like, wow, I'm giving God an awful lot of pass for things that we intuitively know is wrong. So part of being humans is we have empathy. It's what it means to be human. And we're able to look at people and know if we need a thriving society, that the golden rule is one we should live by. Now you say, Jesus said the golden rule. You see the golden rule in Buddhism. You actually see it in a version of Hinduism. You see it in Scientology, interestingly enough. And you see it in Judaism and Christianity. Not that Jesus or the Old Testament invented it in Leviticus 19, but kind of discovered a common sense principle. That's a quick answer, but go ahead if you want to follow up.
I would only say this, and this is sort of a question and just reflecting on what you're saying. And I'll just ask you what you think about this. C.S. Lewis talks about, where we judge past cultures based upon our own cultural sensibilities of today.
Sure.
He calls it chronological snobbery.
Mm-hmm.
And as opposed to judging a culture based upon the culture in which they were living in. Do you see yourself as having maybe some of that, looking back at we talked about slavery and so on, but then maybe over against the cultures of the day, maybe it was more moral.
So if I heard you correctly, am I a chronological snob?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure I heard you.
Well, wait, I'll say it. Let me take that back.
You don't have to take it back.
I would say it like this. I would say we all are. It's probably the way. It's the waters we swim in. We tend to look at past cultures.
That's fair. I appreciate the question, the way you asked it. So I'm familiar with C.S. Lewis and his idea. And I would say we do have to judge a culture by its time. I think it's easy removed from a culture to be quick to judge and not place ourselves in that culture and say, honestly, if I were there, how would I view things? I think that's a very fair exercise to a point. But does that mean we can't look back and say, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was never okay to own people and treat them as slaves? I think we can still judge that with some grace, but with a sense of truth. Genocide, I'm pretty sure, is not okay any culture, any place, any time to do that. So C.S. Lewis also wrote in his book, Abolition of Man, that he said there are certain common principles that broadly transcend culture. Now, he would say that's because there's a common designer. I'd say that's because we have a common ancestor. So even Lewis, with this belief in chronological snobbery, was able to say there's certain principles that transcend culture and we know things about life, we know things about courage, we know other moral principles, and people in certain cultures should have known those by Lewis's own standard. Does that make sense? Good question. All right. Right here. Boom.
Okay, so my question was, can you prove that God doesn't exist with actual evidence or facts? And if not, are you basing that on faith or an opinion?
So that's a good question. Thank you. Here's what I would say: a few things. I would say, now don't disappear in case she wants to follow up. Yes. I don't think the burden of proof is on me to disprove the existence of God. If I can't disprove the existence of God, it doesn't follow that I have blind faith. That's like moving from premise A to the conclusion without filling in premise B and C and D in an argument. Okay, so if you're the one who says God exists, where does the burden of proof lie? On me to disprove that, or you to prove it? This is the participatory part of the program. Me to disprove it, or you to prove it? You to prove it. If you make a positive assertion, defend it. Otherwise, at least minimally, we could say the default position is maybe a kind of agnosticism that says, I'm not sure. With that said, I think we know pretty definitively that the Christian God doesn't exist. I think we know this, and I'll give you two examples. One, how many of you believe there's one God? Let me see your hands. Okay, all right, put your hands down. How many believe the Father is God? The Father's God. That's one. How many believe Jesus is God? That's two. How many believe the Holy Spirit is God? That's three. You can't tell me there's one God and there's three gods at the same time. That's a logical contradiction. Now, what happens is my Christian friends will say, well, God exists on a higher logical plane and it's a mystery. And I'm like, if believing in this God, I have to give up elementary math, I'm out. So that's one reason we know at least the Christian God doesn't exist. But I think we can know a monotheistic God doesn't exist for this reason. How many believe God is all powerful? Let me see your hands. Okay, so how many think God can do anything? Okay, how many think God is good? Let me see your hands. Okay, how many believe evil things really happen, that evil exists? Okay, if God is all powerful, he could stop evil. If God is all good, he would stop evil. And yet evil exists. So either God's not all powerful, or God's not all good, or maybe like Sam Harris said in Letter to a Christian Nation, God doesn't exist is a better explanation. So the burden of proof is not upon me to disprove Christianity, but there are 2 points that tell us minimally the Christian God cannot exist unless you abandon logic, which I'm not willing to do. Did you want to follow up, or did that help?
So you were saying, like, if God is all powerful, repeat what you said. You said God was all powerful, then he wasn't all good?
No, if God is all powerful, he can stop evil. Mm-hmm. You guys said he could do anything. Yeah. If God is all good, he would want to. Just like we see evil, when we have the power and can stop it, we do, or we're not good.
Then wouldn't it be that every single thing that people do, every evil thing someone would do, that God would just get rid of them? It could be a lie, it could be stealing, that he would just kill them or get rid of them. Would that be loving?
Well, so I didn't say that's God's only option. You're assuming that God can only respond by killing people the moment they do bad. I'm saying God is all powerful. That's not the only option available to him.
What other options would you, can you think of?
Well, I'm not God. I don't have to think of them.
But you say that God has other options. So what other options would you, if you were, what would you think? What other options would you have?
So I have limited knowledge. I will gladly concede that. God has unlimited knowledge on a Christian view and unlimited power. So now the burden of proof is not on me to act as if I'm God with that knowledge that I couldn't have in my state and say how God should do it. The burden of proof is upon you because you are the one who believes in the God with these very attributes. So we got to be careful where we shift the burden of proof. Good questions. You're on the right track asking these questions. In fact, keep it up. You might end up a skeptic. Where's the mic? I can't. Oh, here we go. You're like
All right.
blending in.
So I'm not being sarcastic here. I'm not painting you into a corner. I'm curious about this. I think we're all aware that Christians have their heroes, Spurgeon, Lloyd Jones, guys like this. I would imagine, but I don't know this to be the fact, that atheists would have their heroes as well. So when you take somebody like Robert Jastrow, I think he was the director of NASA, and he has a quote that says, "For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries." When the folks who say that there is no God...
That was God.
Session 1 over
Actually,
now.
you think it's God, you search long enough, you'll find a natural explanation for that noise. I'm just telling you.
So when the natural explanations don't add up in the course of this question here, and Robert Jastrow and others, Philby, I think a chemist from England, and they say science is actually proving intelligent design, and then Robert Jastrow kind of abandons his belief, not as an atheist, but when he essentially says the theologians have been there way before we got there. How do atheists deal with their heroes letting them down or backing off of things that they believed at one time?
Okay, so just for context, this is what we call a loaded question. Okay? So you added in there, scientists have proven intelligent design. That was loaded in there. Okay, that's something that I would challenge. You started by asking, do atheists have their heroes? Sure. Humans have heroes. You could look to people like Bill Gates, many would point to, who doesn't believe in God, but has done as much good as anybody on the planet. A lot more than the church has done when we look at the harms that the church has done, to be honest with you. So, of course, people have heroes. Now, are there people who say they don't believe in God and then believe there's evidence for God? Sure. Are there people who believe in God and leave and abandon their faith? Sure. If you follow the news, it happens weekly. Former evangelists, former apologists, former worship leaders, former authors, former pastors. So that can go both ways, and in itself doesn't prove anything. Now, when did Jastrow write that statement that you read? I'll answer it for you. In a book called God and the Astronomers in the 1970s. That was 5 decades ago. Since that time, an awful lot of scientists have reconsidered and said, whoop, we jumped ahead of ourselves. From quantum mechanics to string theory, we have found more and better explanations that were posited as intelligence in the middle of the 20th century that not all, but an increasing number of scientists, hence the growth of secularism within the West, supports, are going, yeah, we may have spoken too soon. The evidence actually points the other direction. So Jastrow is not one of my heroes. I don't know how many atheists would consider him a hero. Smart guy, worked for NASA. Don't want to take that away from him, but nothing falls for truth from his statement 5 decades ago in the 70s. Go ahead.
So I'm not saying anything falls from truth from that. What I'm saying is when an atheist shifts their position, like, how do you handle that without coming and pointing at the Christians? Because I knew that you would come back and say, well, Christians, fall all the time and we have our heroes. What I'm saying is when atheists back off of their claims, does that, in the same way, let's be fair, in the same way that it affects Christians, how they view the Christian faith, does that affect yours at all when they back off of their claims about science?
So here's how my Christian friends respond when somebody leaves the faith. They go, yeah, they were never in the faith. 1 John says, if you're amongst us, you wouldn't leave. So they dismiss them. I'll look at somebody and go, okay, why'd they leave? What's the evidence? If there's evidence for God, I'm willing to believe it. I'm not holding a position just because I want to hold that position and win some debate. There's a lot at stake. If there were evidence for God, I would believe it. So if I see a story like Jastrow, somebody with that level of training and knowledge, I'll pause and go, okay, what convinced Jastrow? That's interesting. Has he found something that I don't know? I don't find Christians doing the same thing when somebody leaves the faith. They dismiss him. They write him off. They never believed. So, well, you made a wholesale comment about atheists, so it goes both ways. That's my only point. Yeah, but you started it, not me. I didn't say you couldn't make it. I never said that. I just said if you look at the way Christians tend to respond, it's actually different than the way a lot of atheists respond. That's my experience.
That's fair.
We'll leave it on that one. Good question. Whoever's got them up top.
Hi. I had an original question, but then your answer to another question, I guess, inspired me to ask a series of 3 questions that are just simple yes or no. One is ice water? Is ice water?
Okay, so instead of like putting me on a stand and trying to trap me, why don't you just ask what your question is? I know where this is going, but I'll let you ask it.
Well, I'm just saying, is ice water? Yes. Is steam water? Yes. Is the liquid in the river water? Yes. But my original question was...
Wait, hold on. What's your point?
Well, just because earlier you were saying that, we believe God is 3 people, but it's one God, and things can take different forms and still be one thing. Okay, so if I understand you correctly, you're saying water in 3 states is an adequate explanation and solution for the apparent contradiction in the Trinity that I raised earlier. Not an apparent contradiction, but just an idea that it is, even within the scientific world, something that is possible. It can exist in 3 forms and be seen in 3 different ways, but it is still one thing. Okay, so the question of the Trinity is not a scientific question. It's a philosophical question. It is a philosophical question. So let me ask you a question. But I'm just saying from your perspective. Is modalism heresy? Is modalism heresy? Do you know what modalism is? No. It's the idea that there's one person in the Godhead who is the Father, becomes the Son, and then becomes the Holy Spirit. One person, 3 modes. Because when you talk about water, you would have, say, 5 grams of ice. That same gram of ice melts and becomes water, and then it heats up and becomes steam. It's the same water in 3 different states, which is akin to modalism, which my friend up here gladly said is heresy, and Christians burn people at the stake for believing that. But you can have ice in 1 cup, water in 1 cup, and steam in another container, and it's all water, but it's now you're committing tritheism because there are 3 complete, distinct sets of water that are not one. Look, I'm actually defending Christian orthodoxy right now, and you're defending heresy, lady. Look, I appreciate that you're thinking and pushing back, but I have gone through all of these mental gymnastics to try to save my faith, and it can't be done, if you're honest. Okay, fair enough. My original question was going to be, what keeps you grounded? When it comes to tragedies, things that would make you mourn, things that would make you happy, when bad things happen, That's a good question. Keeps you grounded? I'll tell you what doesn't ground me is the Lakers, because they are bad this year, off to a bad start. And I mean, only partly in jest, because we do oftentimes look to like hobbies and experiences to divert us when times are difficult. My response is probably very similar to yours. I look to friends, I look to people that are around me, I look to my beliefs about the world, and am able to process tragedy. I don't point towards an imaginary God. I've tried to pray many times, and God doesn't answer. He doesn't answer. So that's my quick answer, is I have people in my life, human beings, that you can touch, you can hear, you can be present with, to mourn tragedy in the world. But I found actually embracing truth is better than believing in some fairy tale that gives you comfort. That's how I process it. Let's face reality and deal with it. Sounds like that's at least sufficient. We'll go to another one in the back.
So we got one in the back here.
Where do you believe the universe came from? Who or what created it? And what is your proof?
Now, 3 questions strung together, but good job. Very thoughtful, very to the point. When you said who or what created it, I obviously don't believe a who created it, because that implies an intelligent designer and some kind of God. To say that God created the universe actually doesn't solve the problem, because then you have the problem of who created God. You see, God is a science stopper rather than one that encourages further scientific research. People used to say, oh, it's a plague, pray about it. And then some stubborn secular scientists are like, no, actually, maybe there's a natural cause here. Let's discover it. And they understand things like viruses and bacteria, etc. So I don't think God created the universe. There's not a shred of evidence for God. And if God did, we'd still have the question of who created God. I actually think Lawrence Krauss has given the most plausible explanation. Now, it's going to sound crazy on the surface, but keep something in mind. Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. It is. If any of you study science, there's spooky, crazy, weird things that happen in the world. So, for example, this podium up here, those of you who study physics can tell me what percentage of this podium is empty space. What percentage? Roughly. Like 95%. The vast majority of this is empty space. Now, if you didn't understand physics, you'd be like, sorry, Sean, you're crazy, you're nuts, it's obvious, just look at it. It's intuitive. But when we break things down and understand them more deeply, we realize, oh, that's actually almost entirely empty space. Why am I telling you this? Because we used to think Newton's laws about cause and effect applied to the whole universe. We realize they're true on a macro level, but not true on a micro level. They break down because of quantum physics. And we see uncaused things happening all the time. It's a part of quantum mechanics. We don't fully understand it, but certain things with like electron splitting, it's like weird, we don't get what's going on. The point is not every effect has what we would consider a sufficient cause. We see things coming into existence uncaused. So if we can observe that on the quantum level, I don't see why we would have to have such an explanation for the origin of the universe itself. I think Krauss is right. Like something from nothing, as spooky and crazy as it sounds, is much more plausible than a God who himself would need an explanation anyways. Now, do you want me to go into some of the math behind it? Stephen Hawking walks us through in his book, The Grand Design, how you can have a creation and potentially even a beginning point without there being a creator? Or is that at least sufficient for where you wanted to know where I was coming from?
That's good. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
That's over here.
All right.
What do you think will happen to you after you've died?
That's a good question. So let me ask you a question just for clarity. Do you believe in the soul?
I do.
How many of you believe there's a soul? Okay, all right, that's what I suspected. So my assumption would be that you think a human being is body and soul. And when your body stops functioning, your soul leaves your body. That's death and goes to be with the Lord. Is that a fair summary insofar as it goes? Okay. So I don't believe in the soul. I don't think you have this immaterial self that exists apart from your body. So hence, when your brain waves stop functioning, your heart stops beating, that's the end. Life is over. Now, we could talk about how you cope with that and how you deal with that. That's an emotional, existential question. But I think not only is there no good evidence for the soul, I think there's good reason to think there is no soul. And I'll give you one piece. One thing we're often told is that personality is in the soul, not in the body, right? Because the body has like mass and weight and color, but personality doesn't. It's immaterial, so it must be in the soul. But what's interesting is if you've studied certain people who've been in accidents, that it affects their brain. Do you know what happens to some people who sometimes have had maybe a tumor or an accident and it damages their brain? Their personalities change. You've heard of these stories. What does that tell us? You don't need a soul to ground personality. It's in your brain. So I think when you died, that's it. If you had good evidence that life continued, I would be open to that. I just don't find any good evidence that life continues after the grave. Does that answer your question? Did you want to come back?
No.
Good question. Thanks. We'll do two more and then we'll wrap up.
How would you respond to the patterns of life? Like when a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, did that happen by accident if there's no intelligent designer?
Very interesting question, because you said, did that happen by accident if there's no intelligent designer? This is what I would call a false dilemma. That's a false dilemma. You're saying it's A or B, and I'm like, no, actually, it's C. Evolution is not an accidental process. Now, it's not planned by a God and designed. There's not a shred of evidence for that. And we can actually point towards bad design in nature to tell us there's not an intelligent design, or things like every year 30,000 people choke to death. Well, why would some intelligent designer put the same mechanism you breathe and eat in the same means, and so 30,000 people are going to die? Like, even the number of miscarriages that happen per year, because of the canal that God has allegedly designed, if it was a little different, it wouldn't have so many miscarriages. These things tell me there's not an intelligent designer. So I don't believe in intelligent design, but that doesn't mean that I think it's an accident. Evolution is, it's not a random process any more than certain things in nature, like crystals forming, are not random, but you see patterns and you see order because of the way that nature itself is. So the very question itself, I think, is flawed and fails to understand the evolutionary process, which we actually established earlier. Last question, go.
Here you go.
Oh, man, he's like, I don't want the last question. I'm punting. To the guy with an Auburn jacket on. My sister went there. Good choice. Go.
What proof supports evolution? Like, what really makes that a real thing? Like, what proof supports that?
Okay, it's a good question. Since you asked, can you define what you mean by evolution for me?
Like, that things change, like, greatly over time. I mean, yeah.
Oh, well, that's easy. Things change greatly over time. I mean, you can just look at your body changes over time, right?
Yes.
Just hit, like, we'll just leave it at that, but you get the point?
Yeah.
We can observe things changing greatly over time. The weather changes greatly over time. So I don't know why you would need evidence for that. Just observe the world. Just look in the fossil record. It's obvious things have changed over time.
But, I mean, like, there are no fossil records of, like, that dinosaurs changed into birds, for example.
How do you know that? You said there's no... There's no? Are you sure? That's an absolute statement.
Show me some proof. Tell me some proof.
Have you considered Archaeopteryx? Archaeopteryx is a bird with reptilian characteristics. Scales, claws, breathing mechanism more similar to a dinosaur than to a bird. In the fossil record, roughly where we would expect to find it when birds emerged from dinosaurs. Archaeopteryx is one example.
So you would say all dinosaurs turned into that type of...
No, I didn't say that. You said there's not a shred of evidence, and I gave you one example. So now we realize that statement was an overstatement and it's false.
Okay. Sorry.
So I was asking you to define evolution. What do you mean by evolution?
That things completely change over time.
Things completely change over time? I don't know anything that's completely changed over time. Look, I'm not picking on you, but you asked me to give evidence for evolution. I just want to know if you understand what you're asking.
Yeah.
Here's what we know about evolution. There's two mechanisms. Number one, not a mechanism, there's common descent. That all living things trace back to one or a few common ancestors. And the mechanism driving this is natural selection operated on by random mutation. That's the neo-Darwinian synthesis, you might say. And there's actually other contributing factors to the increased complexity and diversity. Now, the evidence for this is all over the place. For example, humans and chimps share 99.72% DNA similarity. Tells us we have a common ancestry. If you look at biogeography, where organisms exist, you can see, starting in kind of the Middle East and in Africa, a change over time in complexity and diversity. If you look at what's called homology, which are similar structures across different organisms, like a similar mechanism underlying organisms for walking, for flying, for climbing, again tells us we have a common ancestor. You can look at certain broken genes like pseudogenes that performed a function in our ancestors, and we have the leftover vestige of them, but they don't perform those functions anymore. You can look at vestigial structures, like we have a coccyx in our back that used to perform a function when we had tails. We don't have tails anymore, but we have the remaining structure from when we did. Now, I could keep going. I don't want to overwhelm you, but you asked, so hopefully that's sufficient evidence to at least tell you where I'm coming from.
Thank you.
All right? By the way, good job asking a question, man. Way to step up and just do it. How old are you? You're 13 years old, and you had the courage to ask a question. Good work. Nice job. The atheist is gone. I'm really not sure if you're clapping for him or clapping like, oh, you did a good job as an atheist, or you're clapping like, we're glad you're gone. Maybe all three. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. Take a deep breath, go. Do it again. I don't believe almost anything that I just defended with my glasses on. Okay? If you're feeling a little bit unsettled and trying to make sense of some of these, you're in exactly the right place today, because we're going to help process these and you find answers to some of the toughest questions being asked today. We're going to come back to some of those, all right? But let me ask you a question first before we probe into the apologetics. As a whole, how do you think you treated your atheist guest? Too gentle? Okay. Well, anybody else? Raise your hand and tell me I'm curious what you think. How do you think as a whole you treat your atheist guest? Go. She's like doing this in case you missed it. Like just that communicates it all. Okay, so we've got a range here. Too soft and like maybe too hard. All right. Lots of interpretation. What else? I'm curious.
We're hitting the brain and not the heart.
Okay. All right. Now that raises a lot of interesting questions. As an atheist, if someone who's asked to speak on why they believed, would they want somebody to go after the heart or respect their intellect? That's a fair question to ask, right? But you're also saying there's got to be heart issues here too, not just intellectual ones. What else do you think? All the way up in the top. You think we should have asked more personal questions? Okay. All right. Good. So let me ask you this. Okay, go ahead. Last one. Uh-huh. There you go. There's always one who asks that question. Thank you for waiting until it was done. And they always think they're the first. That was good timing for that. So here's my question. If you were in my shoes, and I know I was role-playing, and you were an atheist, how would you think about us as Christians? And don't answer that, I just want you to think. Would you think thoughtful, inquisitive, gracious group, or would you maybe process us a little differently? That's a fair question, isn't it? I've done this, I don't know, probably hundreds of times over the past 15 years. Youth groups of 12, actually in the Philippines, I did this in a stadium with 8,000 people, which I think was probably too many. I set up microphones around the stadium. I was like, there's a lot of people here. And usually when I step out of character and I ask people, I ask it differently than I did today. I'll say, give me individual words that describe how you think you treated the atheist. One of the most common words is defensive. Hostile is a common word. Recently, one girl said something like unpersonal or non-personal. I was like, that's interesting. What do you mean? She said, I think we looked at you as like a project to win rather than just a human being who's in front of us. We could lovingly engage. You see, when it's all said and done, my concern is not as a whole the nature of the questions, but the spirit in which we ask them. I was speaking at Duluth, Minnesota. I don't know. All right, there we go. One person from Biola, one person from Duluth. And another beautiful city, by the way. And it was to a stadium, if I remember, maybe 6,000 students. And I was doing my atheist role play. And at this time, I wore an atheist jacket. I hadn't bought my atheist glasses yet. And I turned around to start, or I had an atheist hat on. I turned around to start, and this group, a few hundred of them go, boo, boo, go home, Mr. Atheist. And I hear a youth pastor go, you're going to hell, like he shouts it out. And so I went off script. I was like, okay, wait a minute. Here I'm, and they knew I was a Christian. I said, I'm here to role play an atheist, and you boo me. You think Jesus or Paul would treat a guest that way? I'm just curious because Paul said, you know, like if you speak in tongues and have words of prophecy but don't have love, you're like a clanging cymbal and you have nothing. I was like, you think Jesus would do that? He was accused of being a friend of sinners. He said, love your enemies. I started laying into these students, and it was silent in the entire stadium, which proves there's a God because junior hires were present. 1 or 2 summers after this, I was speaking in Salt Lake City to about, 400 or 500 students. And I turned around to start, and at the very beginning, this group of students go, woo-hoo-hoo, we love you, Mr. Atheist. And that caught me off guard, because normally there's like tension. So I went to them afterwards. I was like, why did you guys erupt in applause for the atheist? They said, well, we were part of the group that booed you in Minnesota. And my next thought was, they got the point. They got the point. You see, as an undergrad, I was a communications major. And very simply put, communication can break down to 2 things: the medium and the message. The medium is the means by which you communicate something. The message is the content. So the medium could be a text, it could be a book, it could be shouting, it could be clouds in the sky, it could be a blog, it could be a YouTube video. The medium is the means by which something is communicated. The message is the content and information you want to communicate. Now, as Christians, which should we care about? Both. Both. Jesus came in grace, and he came in truth. God revealed himself and reveals himself in nature, through dreams, through scripture, through angels, through prophets. But when God fully was going to reveal himself, he took on human flesh and entered our realm relationally. God has revealed himself through relationship. Paul says we not only gave you the gospel to the church in Thessalonica, content, but we gave you our very own lives. Relationship. You see, I see one of 2 mistakes being made today. Either people say, you know what, I'm God's prophet, I speak truth without love. Paul condemns that in 1 Corinthians 13. The other side says, well, maybe the loving thing to do is to soften or compromise truth. That's also unbiblical because Jesus said it's the truth that shall set you free. What we need more than ever in our world today is people to speak truth without compromise, but do it in love and in kindness. Sometimes I think we're more interested in winning arguments than we are in winning people. You see, we're supposed to make arguments, but we're not supposed to be argumentative. Those are very different things. A few summers ago, I was speaking at a state. I won't mention which one it is. It's a huge state in the center in the south. It starts with a T, but I don't want to call it out because I was born there. And I was speaking at this camp all week, so I must have spoken a dozen times. And I started by doing my atheist encounter. And there's, 400 or 500 junior high school students. This group was as testy and defensive as any group I can remember. And finally, this girl in the back, she stands up, she goes, "Mister, I just want to read you something." I said, "Okay, what do you read me?" She said, "It's in the Bible, the holy word of God." I said, "I'm an atheist. I don't believe the Bible." She goes, "I don't care, listen up." She's going to be an excellent parent someday. She reads to me Psalms 14:1. "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." I said, "So you're calling me a fool?" She goes, "Yep, Bible says it, that settles it. I believe it. You're a fool." Her friends jump up, go, "Woo-hoo-hoo," and start pointing, like, "We got you, fool," and then they sit down. Now, in all fairness, right now on my YouTube channel, on Mondays, I've been releasing the top 10 misunderstood verses in the Bible. And I think Psalms 14:1 is one of them. If you read this passage closely, it's not calling the atheist a fool. Read it. It's not talking about intellectual belief. It's talking about behavior. The one who says there is no God, meaning the one who lives his or her life as if God doesn't exist, is the fool. Can you believe in God and live your life as if God doesn't exist? Absolutely you can. So when that session was done, these students surrounded me because they were all like wanting answers to their questions. They weren't at a conference quite like this all day where we're going to explore science and faith, violence in the Old Testament, etc. And I talked to students, I don't know, maybe an hour, and at the very end, a girl came up to me. And I'll never forget because she came up and she said, she kind of looked both ways and said, I want to thank you for doing your best to defend atheism. I said, sure, why are you thanking me? She goes, well, I'm an atheist. Like she was revealing this like hidden secret coming out of the closet to me. And I said, wow, you're at a Christian camp. How'd you get here? She said, well, I am a leader in my youth group. I said, I feel like I'm missing something here. She said, I've grown up in the church, been youth group my whole life, but recently I had a lot of questions. Didn't make sense to me. And the advice I got was just read the Bible, pray, don't doubt, that's from Satan, just believe. And she's like, I started to realize I don't believe anymore. I said, well, have you told anyone? She said, no, you're the first person I've told. I said, why haven't you told anyone? I'll never forget what she said. She said, because I'm afraid they'll treat me like they just treated you. Friends, I don't think we realize as Christians, I really don't, the stories we tell, the labels we give, the jokes we laugh at, let's just say communicate something different than God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, to quote the 4 spiritual laws. The more I do this, the more I think we Christians have a lot to learn about humbling ourselves, following James 1:19, being quick to listen, slow to speak, and just loving people. I just did an interview. What is today, Saturday? Everything post-COVID just melts together like COVID did. We're not even post-COVID, are we? Maybe in North Carolina. It's still in California. And what was I just talking about? Just distracted me with COVID. Oh, yes, thank you. Just on Wednesday, interviewed a friend of mine who teaches at Biola, who's written 3 books on deconversion. 3 books, and done extensive research for it. And this was called Before You Go, a checklist for people before they leave their faith. And his whole premise is, when people leave the faith, they'll typically couch it in rational, intellectual terms. But as big, if not bigger, are non-rational factors. Not irrational, but non-rational factors, like emotional hurt, unmet expectations, a difference in values, broken relationships. More often than not, the more I talk with people who've deconverted, I consistently hear hurt and pain and disillusionment at the church. And when we lead with, you're wrong, and here's why, and you're mistaken, even if we're right, in their minds, it's affirming, yep, you don't love me, you don't listen to me, I'm a project to win and beat. I'm just telling you how a ton of people feel. About 6 months ago, I was invited to do this at a Christian school in Florida. It's called King's Academy. And I don't know, maybe 300-400 students, private Christian school. And when I got there, the Bible teacher, he goes, hey, I role play all the time with these students. I'd like to introduce you as a real atheist. What do you think? And I had somewhat mixed feelings about it, but I was like, you're the Bible teacher. If you think this will work, maybe it'll make it even more spicy and interesting. Let's do it for the sake of teaching. And so he introduced me. We came up with the idea that I was a UCLA professor of philosophy in town for a convention, swinging by my old friend's school to tell him why I'm an atheist. So I did the same thing we just experienced, come out of character, reveal it, and I thought it was great, move on. And then weeks after this, I start to get emails. Then I start to get a lot of emails of people who appreciated it and loved it because this Christian school put it on their Christian school website. And last I checked, it's been a couple weeks, over 3 million views on YouTube. Now, because of what I do, occasionally I'll get recognized in public. I was getting recognized at like basketball games, in the airport. I'm like, this is weird. And all these people are giving me, oh, loved it. I didn't realize I got to be kinder to atheists. This is great. And then all of a sudden one day, the narrative completely shifted. I got a ton of emails. To put it frank, some of the most vitriolic, hateful, hurtful emails I have ever received. But what happened is 2 atheist YouTubers, one that I know a little bit, have interacted with, one I hadn't heard of before, who has over 400,000 subscribers, did a review of my atheist roleplay. Now, I thought they overall tried to be fair in their response, weren't jerks about it, and tried to point out certain positive things. That message was lost on a few people that watched the video and at least contacted me. I'm getting things like, you're a lousy atheist, why don't you shut up and go home, and all this stuff. I'm like, dear Lord, my message is like to be kinder to one another, like, hello. Anyways, their big thing was like, don't you misrepresented atheists. Why don't you bring in a real atheist? Well, when I saw this, I'm getting so many emails, and I look and it's going viral. I'm like, oh man, I got to respond. Well, a bunch of my Christian apologist YouTube friends contacted me. They're like, hey, come on my show and do a response, which I appreciate that they would offer. But I started thinking, what's the Christ-like best way to communicate with somebody? Is it atheists do a YouTube video, Christian apologist responds and puts them in their place? Just didn't strike me as the way we should communicate on that medium. So I reached out to one of the atheists. I said, hey, saw your video. Here's some helpful things you pointed out that I can learn from, really appreciate it. Would you be willing to just have an off-the-record conversation? He goes, sure. So this was a Friday. We Zoomed for over an hour. And all I did is I said, hey, I'd love to hear your story. Tell me where you're coming from. What do you want me to know as a Christian apologist? To make a long story short, he's 27 years old, grew up in a Christian home, conservative Christian home, not in North Carolina, but probably smaller town, just probably has a lot of similarities to Boone in some ways, a lot of Christians there. And he said, when I started to question my faith, let me put it this way. He said, when I was a kid, I got bullied and picked on a lot. So I actually took karate to learn how to defend myself. Then he said, the pain of how Christians treated me when I questioned my faith and left was worse than any bullying I ever received growing up. Now that's his experience. When I heard that, that's heartbreaking, isn't it? That's heartbreaking. So I told him, I said, tell you what, I've already made, this was a Friday, I said, I've done a video response I'm going to post Monday. And I did point out 1 or 2 ways that they actually misrepresented me in their response. So I wanted them to know, hey, we all can misrepresent at times. I didn't respond to every point, that wasn't it, but I just want to say, hey, actually, there's a couple ways you misrepresented my view. It doesn't feel good to be misrepresented, does it? I said, now you had a suggestion for me that I bring in a real atheist rather than role play. And I said, that's a great suggestion, which is why I've been doing it for 15 years. I actually, a few years ago, got to go with a friend of mine and said, we need to bring our students to the most crazy secular place and bring in atheists. So for years, we take students, high school students, to Berkeley, California. And you thought I was going to say Asheville, didn't you? I get it. And we bring in atheists and agnostics, dozens of them. So I said, hey, you might not like my responses. You might think I misrepresented atheism. But the vast majority of answers I gave actually came from atheists who spoke to my students, taking notes and giving those answers back. That's reality. I said, but you offered me a suggestion. I've been doing it. I have a suggestion for you. On my YouTube channel, I've had Mormons, I've had progressive Christians, but I've never had an atheist. Will you be my first atheist guest? I gave my cell number, and I said, if you accept, just call me or text me. As soon as the video was done, he texted me right away, and he said, I'm in. Now, all I told him I wanted to do is, I said, this is not a debate. I just want to hear your story and use my platform, which is primarily Christians. Some atheists watch, but primarily Christians. And I want to hear from you what you think Christians can do better to love their atheist neighbors. Came on my program, and I don't know, maybe 3 months ago, it was pretty remarkable. All I did is listen, and it was heartbreaking. And frankly, we've got a lot of work to do as a church. You know why I think we get defensive sometimes? I've thought about this a lot. In some ways, it's like, I believe in the Bible and Jesus, this is important, and it's like we're defending our home turf. I get that. But you know one big reason I think we as Christians get defensive, and I can speak this with some authority because I've done this to tens of thousands of Christians of every age, every denomination across the U.S., and in fact, internationally a few times. We do get defensive. You know why I think we do? Because we don't know what we believe and why we believe it. We don't. If you haven't really thought about the Trinity and someone presses you, you're going to get defensive. You haven't really thought about why does God allow evil? Someone presses you, you're going to get defensive. You haven't really thought about is there life after death and evidence for the soul, which is a great question, by the way. And someone presses you and says, no, the brain explains it, you're going to get defensive. But if you've thought about this and know what you believe and why, then you're not threatened when people challenge you. That's why conferences like this are so important. That's why I'm willing to come all the way from Southern California. I didn't know this at the time, but my daughter has a big playoff game tonight I'm missing, which is fine. I'll watch it. My wife's going to FaceTime. But this stuff matters. Profoundly, it matters. So we have confidence that Christianity is true, so we can better love our neighbors. So I hope you're here today not to take notebooks so you can go back to Facebook or Instagram or YouTube and win arguments and put people in their place. If that's your goal, please leave during the break because you're going to end up doing more harm than good. I wrote a blog maybe a month ago, and it was called How Would Jesus Comment on Social Media? And it hit me when I look at most Christians, I'm like, man, we are terrible. We like snide comments, dismiss people, rude, ungracious, like consistently. Like, what are we doing? You know how Jesus would comment? He'd ask good questions, wouldn't he? He would speak truth at times, but not typically against non-believers. He'd zing the religious zealots who are too self-righteous. Let me end with this story before break. I wrote a book, in 2010, responding to the new atheists. You remember Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins? They're still around. And I wrote this book called Is God Just a Human Invention? Responding to the question, is there life after death, evidence for the soul? Where does morality come from? That was a great question, by the way. Almost all the questions you asked, I respond to it in that book. Christians were reading it, getting a good response, but I thought, you know what? I'd love to get some atheists to read this. So I called up the largest free-thinking atheist group in Orange County where I live. Called the guy up. I said, hey, his name was Bruce. I'd be willing to come to your hot seat. He actually knew who I was. He had seen me debate on a college campus previously before that. I said, hey, I'd be willing to come to your group and just sit in the hot seat. And you and your skeptical buddies can ask me anything you'd like to ask a Christian. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a lot of fun to me. It's not that I think I have all the answers. I'm more than willing to say, you know what? I got to think about that. That's a really good question. Give me some time. I'll get back to you. What's the harm in just saying that? That's how you learn, and that's honest. I'm an apologist with a PhD, and I say that frequently. So if you're not saying that, something's probably wrong. Either you're not willing to admit that you don't have an answer, or you're not having spiritual conversations with non-believers, one of the two. So I went up there in the hot seat with my pastor and my wife, and we're in a room. There's maybe, a dozen or 15 or so atheists and skeptics. And they asked me questions for about an hour and a half. When it was done, I said, can I ask you guys some questions? They said, sure. Instead of saying, where did the universe come from? How do you get something from nothing? Instead of saying, how do you have right and wrong without God? And these are all good questions for which I don't think there are good atheist responses to. Instead, I said, what blind spots do Christians have? How can Christians better engage skeptics so we're taken seriously? How can we better love you? And I honestly think they were surprised an apologist would show up with the only agenda of like listening and understanding and trying to show kindness to them. And some things they said, one person, a lady sitting in the front, she was probably 70, she goes, listen. I said, what do you mean? She goes, all my Christian friends want to tell me why I'm wrong, but they don't want to listen to my views. Why should I listen to them when they don't listen to me? Fair point. One guy in the back at the time was in his 50s. He used to be a Christian, left his faith, now has a website. He thinks debunking Christianity. He goes, stop the atheist jokes. I thought, man, dang it, I've got some good ones. Actually, the word he used, he said, stop slandering atheists. I was like, sir, that's a pretty serious charge. What do you mean? He goes, look, I'm an atheist. He goes, I will not infrequently just go sit in the back of a church and watch. You know how many of my friends who are not Christians will tell me that they'll occasionally do that? I mean, if you're not a Christian, church is kind of an interesting sociological function to observe, right? I mean, we do weird things. In my church the other day, people's eyes were closed, they're swaying, hands are up, and it's like, thank you, Jesus, for the blood. If you don't understand Christian theology and you walk in, it's either a cult or a medical convention. He goes, I just go observe, and every time I go, there's some cheap shot against atheists or some non-Christian group. My wife was sitting next to me, and we communicate in different ways. I reached over and I kind of squeezed her knee, which means like, we'll talk about this later. This guy's got a complex. We're not that bad. I kid you not, within a week or two, we're sitting in church, and the pastor tells a joke at the expense of atheists. And this time, my wife leaned over and squeezed my knee, and she goes, see, we do it all the time. And you know why she's sensitive to it? Because she has close family members who don't believe in God. I sat there, I was like, you know what? I'm glad I didn't invite my atheist friends and family to church today, because we would have, through the medium, sent a different message than we love you, we're glad you're here, and God has a plan for your life. Friends, I hope you take notes. I hope you learn to give answers, because 1 Peter 3:15 says, set apart Christ as Lord in your heart. Always be ready with an answer. But give it with what? Give it with what? Not love, 1 Peter 3:15. Gentleness and respect, which is in love. That's why we're here, so we can better love our neighbors. Pay attention, take good notes. I realize I didn't answer. Some of you are like, okay, yeah, but what about the Trinity? What about the soul? Is there evidence for the afterlife? What about morality without God? This is why we have a Q&A at the end of the day. It's a hook to get you to stay, right? Brilliantly planned by our very own Pastor Jason. Nice work. Now, on the problem of evil, my first session after lunch is going to be on that topic in depth. So that's one I'm going to unpack and make sense of. But if you had questions from this session, so you don't forget, write them down right now, write them down. Just write down soul in the afterlife or morality in God or whatever that was, so we come back and answer it. I really don't want you to leave today and then have a thought late at night like, you know what, that atheist made sense. I think I'll become an atheist. I would never get invited back to your beautiful city. All right, before we take a break in just a minute, Blake, where are you, buddy? You're coming up in just, oh, there you are.
Right here.
He's coming up in just a minute. You're welcome to come up if you want to. There's some resources back there if they're helpful. One is called So the Next Generation Will Know. Oh, you got it. This book is more for parents, not for students, parents, grandparents, teachers, coaches, a how-to book of passing on faith to the next generation. The fact that you're here, any parents bringing your kids, good for you for doing that. Young people, if you have parents who brought you here, you might be appreciative, you might not be, but can I tell you something? That's special and remarkable. They would bring you more than you probably know. So you're on the right step. If If you're like, what other practical things can I do in my family to pass on faith to the next generation? This is not a why book, it's a how book that's back there. The other one that you mentioned that my father wrote, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. My father, Josh McDowell, was a skeptic trying to disprove Christianity back in like 50s and 60s. Surprised by the evidence, became a Christian when he really understood the love of God. The evidence just got his attention. But it was the love of God that drew him. Like it says in Romans 2, your kindness leads to repentance. He put a book together called Evidence, and no publisher wanted it. They're like, no one's going to buy a list of evidence. Yeah, all publishers wish they knew now than what they know now. The book has sold millions of copies. Updated in the 80s, updated in the 90s. Well, just recently had a chance to work with 36 grad students, including Barry. Where are you, buddy? Barry Wynn. Stand up. Your very own Barry Wynn wrote one of the great chapters and helped us out. Fantastic. He was in my program at Biola. 36 grad students and 12 top scholars in the world to review to try to just have one volume that gives the case for the scriptures, deity of Christ, and the resurrection. And the cool thing for me is it won the Christian Book of the Year in its category, which for me, all that mattered is just a way of honoring my dad, because I really head up the revision. So it's a book that's not meant to go home and read tomorrow. Your brain will fall out if you try to read it in one day. It's so big. But when people say, I'm just going to find 15 minutes a day and read it, talk about it over the dinner table, discuss it as a family, you will learn, your confidence will grow, and you have the kind of conversations that can help pass on that faith to the next generation. I have these kind of conversations with my kids all the time, and studies show it's faith conversations in the context of a relationship that is probably the most significant way to pass on your faith. So if this is a tool back there, hope you'll take advantage of that. If you don't need a book, just buy it because you can actually work out with it. It's actually that heavy. Oh, you got a question for one more question? Was that right?
Well, we're just gonna begin transitioning. So you can go ahead and get
Oh,
back
okay.
to your
Perfect. I'll leave these up here.
case. High Country, give it up for Sean McDowell. Does anybody else's faith feel like they've been in like a dunking booth at the fair? It's how it feels. It's like I've been sitting in there just being dunked over and over and over again. It does. So yeah, he does have a table in the foyer area so you can get out there, you can ask him a question, buy a book, just interact with him. And so that's where he is, in that vicinity right there. I believe Pace has a giveaway for us. You got something for us?
I have one of the books that he was talking about. If you want the other one, if you win this giveaway, and you want the other one, you're welcome to go to the table and be like, yo, Mitchell gave me the wrong book. Give me the other one, and they'll swap it out for you. But yeah, I'll be doing a giveaway at the end of each one of Sean's sessions. Basically a fun fact or a trivia question from what he talked about. It could be serious, it could be a joke. So just be making sure that you pay attention. So the first person who can come up to me and answer this question will receive this book. Or you can change it out for the other book. It doesn't matter to me. You just pick whatever you think you need to read more. So whenever he was doing his atheistic encounter, he talked about a transitional dinosaur bird thing. If you can come and tell me the name of that dinosaur / bird, you win. If you can spell it, you get a high five.
You got to come get it. You got to come get it.
Spell it correctly. Sorry, if you just spell it randomly, it doesn't matter. Oh, Bob Jones. North Greenville Crusaders, anyways.
It's Archaeopteryx.
I think that's how you pronounce it.
We got a winner. Sounds like a winner to me.
Can you spell it? Try to spell it.
Archaeopteryx.
Sure, sounds good to me.
We got it.
Cool. I don't know how to spell it. I don't even know how to spell mayonnaise.
Yeah, I couldn't.
That's why I call it mayo.
I couldn't even if I wanted to. Hey, so we're going to transition into some breakouts. From the breakouts, you're going to go to lunch, and then we'll meet back in here. So that's kind of how the flow is going to go. If you're feeling broke down, we're going to build you up. But first, before you head off to your breakouts, we've got a very descriptive and very professional video that describes the breakouts.
Very professional.
Roll film.
How do we start?
I don't know.
All right, so I'll introduce you. I'll just say, hey, everybody. Just jump in and go through the breakouts. Hey, guys.
You're doing it. Go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, I'll do it.
Okay.
Hey, guys, we're going to run through some of these breakouts for you. We've got 4 or 5 to choose from. What's up first?
What's up first is Christianity anti-science? Location is in Meadowview Room A, and that's led by Barry Wynn. Wynn with 2 N's. Like, what's the point? Like, I'm Mitchell with 1 L. Like, we get, you don't need 2 L's.
But with the last name like Wynn, all he does is win,
and then.
No matter what.
Yeah.
Right, okay. He's a chemical engineer, too.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a lot of school.
Does that mean more explosions?
I don't know. There might be some explosions in there. Check that one out.
Yeah, the next one is Defending the Resurrection, which is location Meadowview Room B, not A, B, led by Aaron Israel, Aaron.
2 A's.
Yeah, again,
that's
see, like this.
That's a pet peeve. Why 2 A's? I don't.
Like, it's not like Blake with 2 E's at the end.
I don't put 2 E's at the end. Do you put 2 M's at the beginning of your name?
No, I don't. Again, that's a first name too. You said it with Wynn, it's last name, but Aaron's first name.
What is it with the 2 letters? Anyway, Defending the Resurrection. I like that one.
Yeah, did Jesus really rise from the dead? Do you want to proof for whether he did or not? Come view that one with A.
It's kind of a big deal. It's kind of a big deal. Check that one out.
All right, next one is, does the Old Testament teach that God is evil?
Have you ever got that before?
Mm-hmm. I've got that question all the time.
A lot of times. What kind of stuff does it say he gets accused of?
I mean, like his Old Testament, I mean, you've got, does it endorse slavery, endorse genocide, endorse misogyny? Big things that our culture is dealing with right now.
Word of the day, misogyny.
Misogyny.
Don't Google that.
Not to be confused. Yeah, definitely don't Google that. Not to be confused with a massage, but misogyny.
Misogyny. So. You'll find out all about that, and that's in, where at?
That's in the Worship Center.
Worship Center.
And that's led by Christian, I don't know, is that Ferrari?
Fernari. Christian
Fernari.
I think he's Italian.
I don't know, he could be French. He's a Christian.
Who knows?
Yeah, but he's a Christian apologist, and he works for Norm Geisler too, so it's pretty cool.
What's up next?
The next one is Liberal Arts Education, Risks and Rewards, location in 1304. So why don't you take this away since you're leading it?
Risk and rewards. Obviously, there's risks and rewards to everything, and there are some risks with being indoctrinated in college or educated in college.
Even public school. Yeah.
Yeah, all the way down. So we're going to kind of talk through that, and that's going to be in location 1304. So I got a number.
You got a number?
I got a room number.
Yeah, I'll let your boy. Ring.
I got a room number.
Beat me if you want to reach me. You know what I mean?
1304.
It's Kim Possible reference. You guys know Kim Possible. Forget it. Moving out along. So the last one is current apologetic trends teens are facing, and that is located in the Rock Chapel. That's actually going to be an interactive panel between a bunch of us student pastors in the High Country.
You going to be in that one?
I will be in that one.
They let you in that one?
Yeah, they let me in that one. None of these other ones, but they let me in that one. Betsy Bullock will be there. Jason Powers will be there. JPP Poison. Poison. Is he related to Poseidon?
I don't know. It's just Poison.
Because he's French.
He's just Poison.
Just Poison.
Yeah, just Anyways. I think it's Poisson. He's definitely French.
Yeah, he's definitely French.
Guy.
Especially that mustache that he sometimes has.
Not a fan.
Not a fan. But yeah, just talking about just some questions that we have, and then we'll open it up for some questions that you guys might have as well at the end. So
that's pretty cool. We get to interact.
Yeah, get to interact. So that's
in the
Rock Chapel.
Rock Chapel, built out of rock.
Built out of rock.
Yeah.
Chapel built out of rock.
Yeah. And there's a map inside of your pamphlet there, so you can find all the classes. But spend some time. Also, if there's 2 that you really want to go to, these are being done 2 times today, so you don't have to miss out. If there's 2 you want to go to, unless there's 3 you want to go to, then you're in trouble.
Yeah. So remember the first 3, because I know you just want to go see Blake and myself, but there's other 3 too, like Ron and Mr. Wynn.
Yeah.
And
those are important.
The Ferrari.
Yeah.
So, you think he'll pull up in a Ferrari or maybe a Corolla?
Yeah. Corolla.
I'm more of a Subaru guy myself. Cool. Well, hope to see you guys in our breakouts.
See you around.
Look, as a kid, I just wanted to fit in. So I did whatever the crowd did. And one day I asked this girl at school that I thought was cute, hey, what you listening to? She said, I like everything, everything